Universal reconciliation questions and answers. Number 3, Romans 8:9. He is none of his, by Clyde L. Pilkington, Jr. But ye are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if so be that the Spirit of God dwell in you. Now if any man have not the Spirit of Christ, he is none of his. Romans 8:9 KJV. Yet you are not in flesh, but in spirit, if so be that God's Spirit is making its home in you. Now if anyone has not Christ's Spirit, this one is not his. Concordant. Question. If all belong to God and all will be saved, how is it that Paul states that there are some that are none of his? Answer. Let's break down the verse by the two important distinctions in the verse, God's Spirit and Christ's Spirit. Yet you are not in flesh but in spirit, if so be that God's Spirit is making its home in you. Now if anyone has not Christ's Spirit, this one is not his. Romans 8:9. God's Spirit. Concerning God's Spirit, the Greek word translated dwells in most English versions is oikeo. Strong's G3 611 defines it to occupy a house, that is, reside. Oikeo is more than mere presence. As Strong's definition goes on to state, it means to cohabit, or, as A.T. Robertson, in his classic Greek work, Word Pictures in the New Testament, explains oikeo is the present active imperative of anoikeo, to make one's home, to be at home. Thus, the concordant literal translation rightfully renders it, making its home in you. Yet you are not in flesh but in spirit, if so be that God's Spirit is making its home in you. So while we can gain some sense of oikeo from the English translation of dwells, a more literal rendering better reveals the true force of the word. In the most expansive reality, God is in fact omnipresent. He is everywhere present. God's all-encompassing presence fills his entire creation, and this would certainly include within all beings. Further, it may be said that in the absolute sense, it is God's breath, his Spirit, pneuma, that is in all living beings. So much so that when God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, man became a living soul. Thus Job 34:14 and 15 plainly declares, if God places it in his heart concerning humanity, he can gather back his spirit and his breath to himself, and all flesh would expire together, and humanity would return to the soil. Therefore, when man expires, breathing his last breath, the spirit it returns to the one, Elohim, who gave it. Ecclesiastes 12:7. Thus Paul boldly declares, even to the Athenian pagans on Mars Hill, for in him we are living and moving, and are, Acts 17:28. Yet relatively it is said only of believers that God's Spirit is making its home in you. So while God is certainly in all, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all, Ephesians 4:6, nonetheless, God is not currently at home in all. However, when God's Spirit is making its home in you, one is elevated beyond the Adamic realm of in flesh to the divine realm of in spirit. Thus, this verse speaks of standing, which is no longer in flesh but in spirit. We have no confidence in our former standing. We no longer have any confidence in flesh. Christ's Spirit. Verse and chapter divisions, which were not a part of the original scriptures, often cause passages to be isolated from their context, resulting in lost meaning and confusion. The portion of scriptures contained in Romans chapter 8 is concerning spirit life, of a standing different than flesh. Paul uses the word spirit, pneuma, 35 times in his letter of Romans. However, well over half of all of these occurrences are found in chapter 8. When God's Spirit is at home in you, we come into possession of Christ's Spirit, and likewise we become uniquely Christ's possession. Christ and the believer have a reciprocal possession of each other. He belongs to us and we to him. This is not now true of all humanity. One day this mutual possession will be a reality for all, when Christ's work of reconciliation has been completed. Then all will be Christ's, and he will belong to all, and then God in turn will be all in all. For now all belong to God as his offspring, and he is in all. Yet the majority of humanity remain alienated from him in their minds, and thus God's Spirit is not making its home in them. They know nothing of spirit life. They know only flesh life. As a result, they do not yet belong to Christ. They are not His because they do not presently possess Christ's Spirit, the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus, which makes them free from the principle of sin and death. However, in the consummation, all will belong to Christ and will be gloriously set free. We are a foretaste of what all humanity will be, for we ourselves also have the first fruit of the Spirit. We who have been granted faith are free from fear and can embrace God as Father. For Christ's Spirit is the spirit of sonship, whereby we are crying, Abba, Father, having been freed from slavery's spirit to fear. Thus, surveying our spirit standing, we learn that nothing consequently is now condemnation, and that we are in accord with Spirit, and that the disposition of the Spirit is life and peace. All of the rest of creation are awaiting the unveiling of the sons of God. They have this as a premonition that they also shall be freed from the slavery of corruption into the glorious freedom of the children of God. In the meantime, the entire creation is groaning and travailing together until now, awaiting the sonship, the deliverance of our body.